Commander Jessica Rodriguez stepped off the transport shuttle with the enthusiasm of someone heading to their own execution. The Galactic Administrative Council headquarters loomed before her like a chrome and crystal monument to bureaucratic inefficiency. At least the coffee would be terrible. "Ah, the human representative arrives," announced Councillor Thrank, his feathered head bobbing with what she assumed was meant to be dignified authority, but looked more like a chicken having a seizure. "I trust you understand that this position requires sophistication beyond your species' typical capabilities." Jess smiled the kind of smile that had made her previous commanding officers nervous. "Oh, absolutely. I brought everything I need to meet your expectations." She hefted a cardboard box that looked suspiciously mundane for someone about to join the most powerful administrative body in the galaxy. The aliens exchanged glances. They'd expected weapons, technology, maybe some primitive human war paint. Instead, she carried office supplies. "Your workspace is through here," said Administrator Quillup, his slug-like form leaving a glistening trail on the polished floor. "We've prepared the standard newcomer orientation materials, 17 volumes covering proper protocol, 14 manuals on filing procedures, and a brief 23-chapter overview of acceptable communication formats." "How thoughtful," Jess replied, setting her box down with the care of someone handling explosives. Because, in a way, she was. The office they'd assigned her was clearly designed to humble the primitive human. Cramped, windowless, and positioned between the janitorial closet and the waste processing unit. The subtle alien equivalent of a passive-aggressive power play. Perfect. "And I assume you'll need several cycles to familiarize yourself with our systems," Frank said, preening his feathers. "Perhaps weeks before you're ready to contribute meaningfully." "Oh, I'm sure I'll pick it up quickly," Jess said, unpacking her box with methodical precision. "We humans are surprisingly adaptable." The first item she removed was a simple placard made of what looked like primitive earth wood. She placed it prominently on her desk, angled so anyone entering could read it clearly. Director Vex, whose insectoid features made poker faces impossible, clicked his mandibles as he read aloud. "Your poor planning does not constitute my emergency." His compound eyes swiveled toward Jess. "This is decorative." "Oh yes," Jess said cheerfully. "Just a little reminder to myself about time management. Very important in administrative work, don't you think?" The three aliens stared at the sign like it might explode. There was something about the simple statement that made their administrative senses tingle with unease. It was too direct, too unapologetically truthful. "Well then," Quillup said, his voice carrying a slight tremor. "We'll leave you to settle in. Your first assignment reports are in your inbox. Due by end of cycle, naturally." As they shuffled away, Jess continued unpacking with the satisfaction of someone who'd just deployed their opening gambit in a war the enemy didn't even know they were fighting. She pulled out a stapler, some pens, a coffee mug that read "World's Okayest Employee," and several more small signs. The aliens had made their first crucial mistake. They'd given a human administrator unlimited access to office supplies and a grievance to address. In the cosmic hierarchy of terrible ideas, this ranked somewhere between poking a sleeping dragon and trying to tax a leprechaun. Jess arranged her workspace with military precision, each item positioned for maximum psychological impact. The sign wasn't just decoration. It was a declaration of war written in Comic Sans font and laminated for durability. She opened her computer terminal and began reviewing the assignment files. 17 different requests, each with impossible deadlines and contradictory requirements. Classic hazing behavior from beings who'd clearly never encountered someone who'd survived the Defense Department's procurement process. "Amateurs," she muttered, cracking her knuckles. Time to show them what Earth's finest had learned from dealing with congressional budget committees and military logistics. The galaxy was about to discover that humans hadn't conquered space through superior firepower or advanced technology. They'd done it through something far more terrifying: properly formatted documentation and an absolute refusal to accept urgent as a substitute for planned. By the next morning, Jess's office had transformed from a cramped afterthought into what could only be described as a shrine to administrative passive aggression. Each sign was positioned with the tactical precision of a sniper setting up overlapping fields of fire. Counselor Thrank arrived first, clutching a datapad with what he assumed was an urgent matter requiring immediate human compliance. He froze in the doorway, his beady eyes scanning the office like he'd entered a minefield. I survived another meeting that should have been an email sat prominently next to her computer. Below it, a smaller sign read, "Lack of planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine." Apparently, she decided the first version needed reinforcement. "Commander Rodriguez," Thrank began, his voice slightly higher than usual, "I have a priority request that requires—" "Please have a seat," Jess interrupted with a smile that could have powered a small space station. "I'll be right with you after I finish properly documenting yesterday's assignments." Thrank's gaze drifted to a new addition. "I'm not ignoring you. I'm prioritizing." His feathers ruffled involuntarily. The human was typing with mechanical precision, occasionally pausing to consult a thick binder labeled Galactic Council Regulation Compliance Manual, Earth Addendum. "You see," Jess said without looking up, "I've been reviewing your assignment protocols and I noticed some fascinating inconsistencies. For instance, Form 7741B requires approval from the Infrastructure Committee, but the Infrastructure Committee can't meet without a quorum. And 3 of its members are currently in hibernation cycles that won't end for another 6 weeks. Administrator Quillup oozed through the doorway, nearly colliding with the still frozen Thrank. His eye stalks swiveled to take in the office's new additions. A sign reading, "Please allow 5 to 7 business days for miracles," had been placed directly above the visitor chairs. "Commander," Quillup said, his voice dripping with condescension, "surely you don't expect us to wait." "Oh, absolutely not," Jess replied cheerfully. "That's why I took the liberty of filing an emergency protocol deviation request with the Efficiency Review Board. Should hear back in 3 to 4 cycles, assuming they accept my attached 17-page justification for why this constitutes an actual emergency versus poor time management." Director Vex materialized in the doorway like a nightmare made of chitin and bureaucratic fury. His compound eyes immediately locked onto the newest addition to Jess's collection, "Your crisis is not my crisis unless you have the proper paperwork." "What is the meaning of this?" Vex clicked, his mandibles spreading in what might have been anger or confusion. "These symbols, are they some form of human war declaration?" "Oh no," Jess said, finally looking up from her work. "They're motivational reminders. Very popular in human resource management. This one's my favorite." She gestured to a sign positioned where anyone approaching her desk would see it. "I can only please 1 person per day. Today is not your day. Tomorrow doesn't look good either." The 3 aliens stood in stunned silence. In their combined 7 centuries of administrative experience, they'd never encountered anything like this. The signs weren't technically threatening, weren't violations of any protocol, and yet they felt like being slowly strangled by red tape while someone read them the dictionary. "About yesterday's assignments," Jess continued, pulling out a manila folder thick enough to stop small arms fire. "I've completed them all, with full documentation cross-reference to relevant regulations. However, I did notice that several requests violated Council Statute 247C regarding interdepartmental communication protocols." She slid the folder across her desk. "So I took the initiative to file appropriate violation reports with the Standards Compliance Office. For your protection, of course." Thrank's beak opened and closed soundlessly. Quillup's eye stalks retracted slightly, as if trying to hide. Vex's wings buzzed with what might have been panic. "You filed violation reports on us?" Quillup managed to whisper. "Standard procedure," Jess said with the cheerful tone of someone explaining why water was wet. "The regulations are quite clear about maintaining proper channels. I'm sure it's just an oversight on your part. The penalties are minimal, probably just a formal reprimand and mandatory retraining." She gestured to her newest sign positioned at eye level for maximum impact. "I'm not saying I told you so, but I have written documentation that I told you so." The aliens began backing toward the door like they were retreating from a particularly aggressive wild animal. Which in a sense they were. They'd encountered something far more dangerous than human military might or technological superiority. They'd met a human who'd actually read the rules. Within a week, Jess's office had become the administrative equivalent of a haunted house. Aliens would approach, see the growing collection of signs, and suddenly remember urgent business elsewhere. Her latest addition, "The floggings will continue until morale improves," had caused 3 different species to file formal complaints with the Cultural Sensitivity Board. Jess had responded by filing counter-complaints about the discriminatory nature of their complaints, complete with citations from the Galactic Non-Discrimination Act. "Commander Rodriguez," came a trembling voice from her doorway. Junior Administrator Blext, a nervous amphibian-like being, clutched a data pad like a shield. "The Council requires your attendance at today's emergency session regarding the Proxima trade dispute." Jess looked up from her computer, where she'd been meticulously cataloging every procedural violation she'd witnessed in the past 7 days. The list had grown to 43 pages. "Emergency session?" she asked, glancing at her newest sign. "Poor planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part. Yes, this applies to you too." How fascinating. According to Council Regulation 15J, emergency sessions require 48 hours advance notice unless specific criteria are met. "Could you provide me with the emergency classification justification form?" Blext's amphibious features went through several color changes. What form?" "EGJ Form 2847 Alpha, Jess said helpfully, pulling out her regulations binder. "It's right here in Section 15, Subsection J, Paragraph 12. Required for all emergency sessions to ensure we're not just calling regular meetings emergencies to bypass proper notification procedures." She gestured to another sign. "I'll get right on that, with a small addendum and barely visible text, right after I finish everything else." "But the Council is waiting," Blext croaked desperately. "Oh, absolutely," Jess agreed. "And I'll be happy to attend once the proper paperwork is filed. Shouldn't take more than a few hours to complete, assuming you can find the 3 required signatures from department heads who aren't currently in various biological cycles." Blext fled, leaving wet footprints on the corridor floor. 20 minutes later, Councillor Threnk burst through her doorway like a feathered hurricane of bureaucratic rage. "Rodriguez, you will attend this meeting immediately." Jess didn't look up from her filing system, which had evolved into something that would make the Library of Alexandria weep with envy. "I'm sorry, Counselor, but I don't see any properly filed emergency classification justification forms in my inbox." "This is ridiculous," Threnk squawked. "We are the Galactic Council. We don't need forms to call emergency meetings." "Oh, but you do," Jess said pleasantly, finally looking up. Her newest sign, positioned directly behind her head, read, "I'm not arguing, I'm just explaining why I'm right. Council Regulation 15J is quite explicit about this. I'm actually protecting you from potential legal challenges by ensuring proper procedures are followed." She pulled out a different folder, this one labeled Liability Prevention Documentation. "For instance, if the Proxima trade dispute parties decide your emergency session was improperly convened, they could challenge any decisions made. That could result in sanctions, fines, and mandatory arbitration procedures." Threnk's feathers were practically vibrating with frustration. "You're being deliberately obstructive." "Not at all," Jess replied, gesturing to her sign that read "Compliance is not optional." "I'm being deliberately compliant. There's a difference, though I understand the distinction might be subtle for beings who haven't spent time in Earth's Defense Department." Over the next hour, a steady stream of increasingly panicked aliens visited her office. Each one left more confused and defeated than the last. Jess had discovered the galaxy's greatest weakness. None of them had ever encountered someone who used bureaucracy as a weapon of war. Administrator Quilup made the mistake of trying to pull rank. "As your superior, I order you to attend this meeting." Jess smiled and pointed to her latest addition. "Your authority ends where my job description begins." Then she pulled out an even thicker folder. "Speaking of which, I've been reviewing the organizational hierarchy documentation, and I noticed some discrepancies in the chain of command protocols." By afternoon, the emergency session had devolved into a regular session, then been postponed entirely while the proper forms were located, filled out, and processed through 17 different departments. Jess spent the time reorganizing her sign collection and adding a new one that would become legendary throughout the galaxy. I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. The war wasn't even close to over, but the aliens were beginning to realize they'd brought knives to a filing cabinet fight. The Council's retaliation came swiftly and predictably. If the human wanted to play bureaucracy games, they'd give her enough paperwork to choke a black hole. Your new assignment roster, Director Vex announced with savage satisfaction, dropping a datapad that contained enough tasks to keep 10 administrators busy for a year, all due by end of cycle. Jess looked at the list while sipping coffee from her newest mug. World's okayest administrator. Deal with it. The assignments were clearly designed to be impossible. Simultaneous audits of contradictory departments, reports requiring information from hibernating officials, and approvals from committees that didn't technically exist. How thoughtful, she said, making notes in her ever-present binder. I'll get started right away. The aliens exchanged victorious glances. Finally, they'd overwhelmed the human with the sheer impossibility of bureaucratic demands. By tomorrow, she'd be broken, defeated, possibly crying into her primitive coffee beverage. They had no idea they'd just activated her ultimate weapon. The next morning, every member of the council found identical messages in their inboxes, per my last email with an attachment containing every communication they'd sent to Jess, but annotated with timestamps, regulation violations, and cross-referenced inefficiencies. Councillor Thrank opened his copy to find his trade dispute request from 3 days ago highlighted in what humans apparently called angry yellow with a note. As discussed in my previous 7 communications regarding this matter. But that was just the opening salvo. Jess had spent the night implementing what she cheerfully called malicious compliance on an industrial scale. Every impossible task had been completed exactly as requested, with documentation that revealed the absurdity of the assignments. The audit of the Department of Redundancy Department had been cross-checked against the Department of Repetitive Functions, revealing they were the same office with different names. Her report included a recommendation to audit the Department of Audit Oversight, which was responsible for auditing the auditors. The hibernating officials had been contacted through their emergency protocols, which required full awakening procedures and formal documentation. 17 different species were now extremely grumpy and demanding explanations for why their rest cycles had been interrupted for routine paperwork. But the masterpiece was her response to the committee approvals. Since the committees didn't exist, she'd filed formal requests to establish them, complete with budget requirements, staffing needs, and facility allocations. The paperwork had been automatically forwarded to the Committee Formation Committee, which had to be formed by the Committee Formation Oversight Board, which needed approval from the Meta Committee Management Division. "What have you done?" Administrator Quellup whispered, staring at the cascade of automated responses flooding his inbox. Jess looked up from her desk, where she'd installed her nuclear option, a sign reading the beatings will continue until morale improves. The aliens had learned enough about human expressions to recognize that this wasn't meant literally, but the psychological impact was devastating. They'd created a feedback loop of bureaucratic horror that was consuming the entire administrative system. "I completed your assignments," Jess said innocently. "All of them. On time and according to specifications." Director Vex's compound eyes were spinning like slot machine reels. "The system, it's eating itself." "Oh, that's just the automated compliance protocols," Jess explained helpfully. "When you submit impossible requests, the system tries to resolve the contradictions by creating new procedures to handle the exceptions. It's very thorough." Her newest sign, positioned for maximum psychological impact, read, "I'm not responsible for your feelings about my compliance with your requirements." The council chamber's main display was cycling through thousands of pending forms, each one spawning 3 more in an endless cascade of administrative reproduction. The entire galactic government was grinding to a halt because someone had finally followed the rules exactly as written. "Make it stop," Thrank pleaded, his feathers drooping with defeat. "Oh, I can't do that," Jess said cheerfully. "That would require violating proper procedures. But I could file a system reset request with the Emergency Protocol Committee. assuming it still exists after the recent restructuring requirements. The aliens stared at her in horror. They'd tried to break a human administrator by drowning her in impossible bureaucracy. Instead, they'd created a monster who turned their own weapons against them with surgical precision. In the distance, alarms were beginning to sound as the administrative cascade reached critical levels. Jess calmly reached for her coffee mug, which bore a new message that would haunt alien nightmares. I'm not saying it's your fault, but I have documentation that says it's your fault. The crisis reached critical mass when the Zephyrian Trade Coalition threatened to withdraw from the galactic economy unless the Council resolved their budget dispute within 24 hours. The problem was that the entire administrative system had become so tangled in Jess's compliance web that no one could access the relevant files. We need her help, Counselor Threnk admitted, his voice breaking with defeat. The once proud alien had developed a nervous tic that caused his feathers to molt whenever he thought about Form 2847 Alpha. Absolutely not, Director Vex clicked, though his mandibles were trembling. We don't negotiate with whatever she is. She's an administrator, Administrator Quellup said miserably. The most terrifying kind. One who actually knows what she's doing. They found Jess in her office, calmly working while the galactic government collapsed around her. She'd added several new signs to her collection. I tried to warn you, and I'm not saying I told you so, but check my email from last Tuesday. Commander Rodriguez, Threnk began formally, trying to salvage some dignity. We require your assistance with a matter of galactic importance. Jess looked up from her screen, where she'd been updating her personal log titled Today's Completely Predictable Disasters. Oh? Do you have the proper request for assistance form? RFA 1847 Charlie, I believe. The aliens exchanged desperate glances. This is an emergency, Vex protested. Is it? Jess asked, consulting her newest sign. Your emergency is not my emergency unless you have an emergency classification form. Because according to my records, you've had 14 emergencies this week, none of which were properly classified, according to Emergency Response Protocol 23 Delta. Quellup's eye stalks drooped. Please. The entire coalition is threatening to leave. The economic implications alone. Oh my, Jess said with the tone of someone discovering a mildly interesting weather report. That does sound serious. Let me pull up the relevant files. She began typing with the speed and precision of a machine gun. Windows cascaded across her screen, each one revealing layers of interconnected problems that would have taken the Council weeks to unravel. Here's the issue, she announced. The Zephyrian Coalition's complaint is about budget allocation transparency, but your Finance Committee has been approving expenditures without proper oversight documentation. Meanwhile, the Oversight Committee has been deferring to the Finance Committee because of some informal arrangement that violates about 17 different separation of duties protocols. Her fingers continued dancing across the keyboard. The solution is actually quite simple, but it requires someone to take responsibility and implement proper procedures. She gestured to her latest masterpiece, a sign reading, I'm not here to enable your dysfunction, I'm here to document it. You want me to fix it, Threnk said, his voice barely above a whisper. Oh no, Jess replied cheerfully. I can fix it. I've already prepared the necessary documentation restructure, compliance protocols, and oversight mechanisms. It'll take about 2 hours to implement. She leaned back in her chair, hands folded behind her head. The question is whether you want me to fix it properly, or if you want to keep pretending that calling everything an emergency is a substitute for actual planning. Director Vex made a sound like air escaping from a punctured habitat. What do you want? Full administrative authority to implement proper procedures, Jess said immediately. Real oversight of the filing systems. And recognition that Earth's administrative protocols are now the galactic standard. She gestured to her collection of signs, which had grown to cover every available surface. Also, I want these officially recognized as motivational tools rather than psychological warfare devices. Fine, all three aliens said simultaneously. Excellent, Jess said, cracking her knuckles. Now let me show you how we handle budget crises on Earth. What followed was 2 hours of administrative artistry that would be studied in management schools across the galaxy. Jess didn't just solve the crisis, she rebuilt the entire system with safeguards that would prevent similar problems for centuries. The Zephyrian Coalition received their budget transparency report before their deadline, complete with real-time access to expenditure tracking and automated compliance monitoring. The report was so thorough and professional that they immediately requested Earth provide administrative consultants for their own government. As the crisis resolved, Jess added one final sign to her collection. "I'm not arguing, I'm just explaining why I'm right." Then she updated it with a subtitle, again. The aliens stared at their savior with a mixture of awe, terror, and grudging respect. They'd learned that humans didn't conquer through superior firepower or advanced technology. They conquered through something far more insidious, actually being competent at the jobs they were hired to do. 6 months later, Commander Jessica Rodriguez sat in her new office as Chief Administrative Officer of the Galactic Council, reviewing applications from 17 different species requesting Earth-trained administrators. Her original sign collection had been preserved behind protective glass, like holy relics in a shrine to bureaucratic enlightenment. "Your 3 o'clock appointment is here," her assistant announced. Blext had volunteered for the position after witnessing what proper administrative support looked like. The former amphibian nervous wreck had transformed into an efficiency machine under Jess's tutelage. The visitors were a delegation from the Andromeda Cooperative, desperately seeking help with their own administrative crisis. They entered her office with the reverent attitude of pilgrims approaching a sacred site. "Commander Rodriguez," their leader began, "we've heard stories about Earth's administrative capabilities. Our government is paralyzed by inefficiency. Our people are suffering. Can you help us?" Jess gestured to the wall behind her desk, where her original signs had been joined by new additions, Earth's Customer Service Department. "We put the service in civil service and humans. We'll fix your government, but you won't like how we do it." Of course, she said with the warm smile that had become famous throughout the galaxy. "But first, let me explain how this works." She pulled out a tablet containing what had become known as the Rodriguez Doctrine, a comprehensive guide to human administrative philosophy that was revolutionizing galactic governance. Rule 1. Everything must be documented. Rule 2. Follow the actual procedures, not the shortcuts everyone's been using. Rule 3. If something seems inefficient, there's probably a reason, but that reason might be stupid. The Andromedan delegation nodded eagerly, taking notes like students in a master class. "The most important thing to understand," Jess continued, "is that humans didn't become the galaxy's premier administrators through any special technology or inherent superiority. We just survived our own bureaucracies long enough to figure out how to make them work." She gestured to her newest sign, the one that had become her trademark across known space. "We survived the IRS, the DMV, and congressional budget committees. Your problems are not that hard." Behind the Andromedans, a steady stream of beings passed by her office window, many pausing to read the signs that had been reproduced in gift shops across the galaxy. "Your poor planning does not constitute my emergency," was the best seller, followed closely by "I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you." The secret, Jess explained, warming to her favorite subject, is that humans developed administrative skills as a survival mechanism. On Earth, if you couldn't navigate the bureaucracy, you couldn't get anything done. Driver's license, building permits, tax returns, insurance claims. We turned ordinary citizens into administrative warriors just to participate in society. She pulled up a holographic display showing the transformation of galactic government efficiency since Earth's integration. Response times down by 78%, citizen satisfaction up by 156%, and bureaucratic conflicts reduced to near zero. "Every human who graduates from our school system has basically completed a 20-year course in dealing with impossible administrative requirements," she continued. "We're not superhuman. We're just really, really good at paperwork." The Andromedans left with detailed implementation plans and a starter set of motivational signs. As they departed, Blext approached with the daily status report. "Ma, the Efficiency Committee's quarterly review is ready," he announced proudly. All departments are now operating within acceptable parameters, citizen complaints are down 89%, and we've eliminated 47 redundant oversight positions. Excellent, Jess replied, updating her personal log. Any new crises? The Regellian Confederation is experiencing some supply chain disruptions, but they're handling it internally using the procedures you established. The Vegan Trade Alliance requested a consultation on their new filing system. And the Centauri Republic wants to license our documentation protocols for their military. Jess nodded with satisfaction. The galaxy was finally running the way it should have all along, efficiently, transparently, and with proper documentation for everything. She stood and walked to her window, looking out at the bustling headquarters of what had become the most effective government in galactic history. Somewhere out there, human administrators were quietly transforming civilization one properly filed form at a time. Her newest sign, positioned where everyone could see it, summed up the human approach to galactic conquest. We came, we saw, we filed the appropriate paperwork. The galaxy had expected humanity to arrive with guns blazing and superior technology. Instead, they'd arrived with staplers, filing systems, and an absolute refusal to accept that's how we've always done it, as a valid reason for anything. And somehow, that had been far more effective than any weapon of war. Jess smiled and returned to her desk, where 17 different species problems waited to be solved with proper procedures and common sense. Tomorrow, she'd tackle the universe.